Hey everybody, Rob here at etrailer.com. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Demco tabless base plate on our 2020 Jeep Cherokee. Now we're going to go ahead and go over some of the features, see what it looks like once we have it installed, but then we're going to make sure that you can feel comfortable to install it at home, and we'll go through the install process together. You just want to keep in mind that is only going to be one component of a complete flat tow setup. To safely flat tow your Jeep down the road, you're going to need several components. You're going to need a base plate. The base plate is going to attach directly to the frame of your Cherokee and give you a solid attachment point for the tow bar to hook up to. Now the tow bar is going to be what actually connects your base plate to your motorhome so that we can tow our Jeep down the road. The next thing you're going to need is tow bar wiring, and that's going to take the signals from the motorhome and transfer them to our Jeep so we can safely have all of our signals, stoplights, and tail lights while we're driving. The next thing we're going to need is safety cables. It's going to be a secondary safety device in the event that a catastrophic disconnection were to happen, and make sure that we're safe when we're going down the road. Finally, we're going to need a braking system. Now, a braking system is going to make sure that our Jeep can slow and stop itself rather than putting all that strain and stress on our motorhome, and it is becoming a requirement in most states. So here's what our base plate's going to look like. I do want to start out by mentioning that the wiring and the breakaway switch here are not included with the base plate, but it is going to be one of those components that you will need to fully flat tow your Jeep behind your motorhome. And that's exactly what a base plate is going to do. It's going to serve as the solid attachment point. It's going to hook directly to the frame so we can hook up our tow bar to the base plate and safely and legally tow our Jeep down the road. And my favorite part about our base plate is the fact that it does have that tabless design, which means that we're not going to have tabs sticking out that hook up to the tow bar. It's going to be a separate component that goes right into the receiver here. We'll have these plastic plugs to make sure we can keep the interior clean. We don't have to worry about any dirt and debris. But that's exactly how our base plate is going to look unless we're towing. It's going to come right out where we had our factory tow hooks. And it's this textured black look, which kind of blends in on the bottom here, so it has a really, really clean appearance. We don't have anything sticking out the front of our Jeep. And to put the arms in place, it's going to be extremely easy. Just keep in mind, they're not going to be floating around like this. These actually bolt onto the tow bar, which is extremely nice because we don't have to worry about losing these. A lot of other manufacturers have a removable arms on there, so you can't pull them out, but this is just floating around and we've got to find somewhere to put it. These are going to securely bolt onto the tow bar, so wherever we have our tow bar, it'll be ready for our Jeep. We'll just take the arm, we'll make sure that flat section is pointing up and down, slide it into the base plate, and we can rotate it to where the two holes on the black section here will be facing up and down. Then we'll take the pin, insert it through the hole, then we can lock it down. I will let you know it's a little bit tight here to get that pin in place because it's right next to the safety chain loop, but once we have it in place, it's not going anywhere, and it gives us a nice solid attachment point to hook up. Now, although it does have an extremely clean look, and it's really nice and it's not distracting, you can see how close our safety chains are to our attachment point. And you saw it's a little bit difficult to get that pin to lock in also for the tab. But when you go to hook up your safety chains, I do suggest coming from the inside and hooking them going towards the attachment point, because that way we don't have to worry about trying to sneak it in from this side. And when we go to remove it, again, it's a little tight, but we don't have to worry about scratching our Jeep or anything like that. It just may hit that bolt when we're trying to put it in. Now, if you're looking for a base plate for your Cherokee, obviously you have a motorhome and you want to take your Cherokee with you on your trips. Because let's face it, it is a lot easier to drive your Cherokee around, especially once you get to the campground. We just need to run to the gas station real quick, or maybe we're going out to dinner. It's much easier and more convenient to drive your Cherokee around rather than your motorhome. And flat towing is a lot easier and more convenient than using a tow dolly as well. I'm not going to have to worry about unhooking, setting it up, doing all those things. It's a lot easier to hook up to a tow bar, unhook, and we can be on our way. But that brings us to our next thing, is when you're looking at a base plate, the compatibility of the tow bar is going to be a big thing. Our Demco base plate is going to be compatible with all Demco tow bars, as well as a few other manufacturers. Roadmaster has a few tow bars that aren't going to require any kind of adapters, but most other brands are going to require an adapter, but it's pretty easy to get them set up and hooked up to your motorhome. So if you already have an existing tow bar, you can make it work with this as well. Now, whenever you are flat towing your Jeep and you got everything hooked up, you want to be as level as possible with your towing setup. We don't want the front of our Jeep nose diving or pointing up towards the sky, because that's going to put a lot of strain and stress on the front suspension. So one measurement that's definitely going to help you out to make sure you are level is the attachment point height of our base plate. Our base plate is going to be right at 19 inches, so you can use that measurement and compare it to what your receiver tube is on your motorhome. You want to measure from the ground right into the middle of the receiver tube and compare those differences to see if you need a high-low adapter for your tow bar. Now, as far as the installation goes, it is pretty straightforward. I will let you know the front fascia is going to have to come off, because obviously our base plate is behind all of this, so we have to get access to the bumper and everything behind the fascia here. Now, there are a few things that I want to make clear before you start your install, because nobody likes surprises. There are 2 rivets on the bottom of the fascia that we have to drill out. They do give you new rivets to replace them once you put the fascia back on, but you want to make sure that you have a rivet gun available so you can put them in place. Another thing is that once we have the fascia off, we are going to have to do a little bit of grinding on the actual bumper structure, but it's very easily removable once we have the fascia off. You can grind on it without fear of doing anything to the car. That way it'll be further away. But again, one of those things you want to make sure you have an angle grinder or something to take down a lip on the bumper beam. In fact, let's go ahead and go through the installation process together so you can know exactly what it entails to get it in place. To begin our installation, we want to open up the hood on our Cherokee. We're going to have this plastic panel that's over the radiator and the core support. And we're going to have several of these plastic pushpin fasteners going all along the perimeter of this panel. We need to pull these out. So you can get yourself a flat blade screwdriver or a trim panel tool. And if you look at the pushpin, there's a really small notch in the side. You want to come underneath the notch on the center section and pop the center section out first on that push pin. Sometimes it can be a little difficult to get underneath there, but again, you want to get underneath the center section of the push pin so we can pop it out, and that'll take the tension off. Once you have the center popped out, you can come underneath the base, pull the rest of the push pin out. And we want to work our way all the way around this plastic panel, pulling all of them out so we can get the whole panel removed. Once you have all the fasteners removed, you can grab the end of your panel, kind of work it past the stops. You can lift it up and set it aside where it won't get damaged. With that cover removed, if we come to the very inside corner of our headlight and we just move to the grill area right above that stop, we're going to find a torque screw that's holding the fascia to the core support. We need to pull that out. So we're going to grab a T30 Torx bit. We'll remove that screw. And we want to move to the other side and pull the other one out. It's going to be in the same location, just on the other side of the vehicle. Now if we move underneath the front of our Cherokee, right in front of each one of the tires, right at the bottom corner of the fascia, we're going to have a rivet. Now we need to pull those rivets out, but since it's a rivet, we can't just use a screwdriver, so we need to drill them out. So you want to get a 3/16 drill bit. You're going to come right in the center of that rivet and drill it out. Once you get it drilled out, you may have to reach in and grab the excess, but we're going to move to the other side and drill the other one out as well. Now if we move towards the center and back a little bit, we'll find our skid plate. Now we're going to have a few bolts towards the back that is holding it in place, and then right along the front edge. So we're going to grab a 13mm socket, and we're going to pull all of these bolts out so that we can pull the skid plate down. Now the skid plate's not really heavy, but once you get to that last bolt, you want to make sure you have a grip on it because you don't want it to fall down. But it is a metal skid plate, so you do want to be careful, but we'll go ahead and set this aside as well. Now at the very front bottom of our fascia, we're going to have our fascia supports where it's going to be bolted in. Now if we look in the bottom here, there's going to be several bolts. We need to worry about the silver head colored bolts. We're going to pull all of those out. So you want to use a 10mm socket and just work your way from one side to the other on the very front. Next, we want to move into the front wheel well right in front of our front tires. Now right where the fender meets the fascia here, if we look on the inside of the liner, we're going to have a bolt, and if we move down in this little recessed area inside the liner again, there's another one, and then at the very bottom corner, we're going to have a third one. We need to pull all three of these bolts out. So we're going to grab an 8mm socket and loosen all of those up. Now if we kind of grab the outer edge here, we can get behind the liner. We want to push the liner out of the way for now. Kind of just hook it on the edge of the tire. But if we look right in the corner, again, right where the fascia meets the fender, on the inside behind the liner, we're going to have a fastener here. We need to pull that bolt out. So for this bolt, we want to grab a 10mm socket, and we'll loosen it up, pull that bolt out. Once you have this bolt removed, we're going to move to the other side of the wheel well. And we're going to do the same process, removing the three bolts holding the liner in, pulling it back, and then pulling this last bolt out. So we can get ready to remove our fascia. Now we want to start over here in the corner area, but I will let you know that it's extremely tight right here. So instead of just pulling on it, you want to get yourself a plastic trim panel tool. We're going to start right at the corner of the headlight, and we want to bring our tool in. You can see it's going to kind of start to loosen it up a bit. And right in this area, we actually need the fascia to go down and out so we can release these clips. So if we kind of start in this area, we can kind of get our trim panel tool in there. Start working it. There's a small tab over here in the corner that needs to come down far enough so then we can pull the fascia outward. So once you get a little piece loose, you can start working your way towards the back here. And again, just kind of get your trim panel tool in there and work that section loose. But right in this corner here is where that tab is. We need to separate those two clips so we can get the panel to come out. And again, it's really tight, but we want to get these clips loose, and it'll make it a lot easier to work our way towards the center. Now you want to be mindful of your lights and any other sensors. You don't want to pull the fascia too far away. Once you get to about the headlight area, you kind of come underneath and pull up. That'll allow you to break the fascia loose. We're going to have some connectors over on the driver's side. Have one right underneath the driver's side headlight. Just press in on, slide that red tab out, and then allow the connector to disconnect. Now we're going to set our fascia aside where it won't get damaged. Now right underneath our tow hook on each side, we're going to have this fascia support. We want to pull that out. We're going to have a total of 3 bolts that are holding it in. So we'll grab a 15mm socket and pull all 3 of those out. And we also want to pull the 3 out on the other side. And you'll notice there's a little retaining nut on there. It's not actually a nut, it's just a little speed nut. So we can take a pair of pliers, grab that and pull it off. So we can pull the support off and then move to the other side and pull that off as well. You can either grab the edge of it if you can, or you can sit there and turn it to where it'll come off. But either way, we need to get this little speed nut off so that we can get the whole thing to come out. Now when we remove this, we can set it aside. It's not going to get reinstalled. Our next step is going to be removing the tow hooks. Now if we follow the front of our tow hook, you can see that bar is going to go straight in, goes behind the frame, and we have a really large nut that's holding it in place. So we're going to grab an 1 3/16 socket. It is a little bit of an awkward position to get in there, but we want to at least break that nut loose so that we can remove it and pull the tow hook out. Having a flex head ratchet here definitely helps because we can get in there, loosen it up, and still have room to get our ratchet and socket out. We're going to have one of these large nuts on each one of the tow hooks, so we'll move to the other side and pull that one out as well. Now also holding each one of the tow hooks on at the very end, we're going to have 2 bolts that are going into the bumper beam on the bottom here. So this time we want to grab a 16mm socket or a 5/8 socket, and we're going to pull both of those bolts out. Now once those bolts are removed, we can slide the tow hook out, and we'll do the same thing for the other side. With the tow hooks out of the way, if we look at the bottom of our bumper beam where it bolts to the vehicle, right here at the bottom we're going to have 2 bolts. We need to pull these 2 bolts out. However, we need to also flatten this flange that goes around our bumper beam. So instead of trying to grind on it while it's on the vehicle, we're going to pull these 2 bolts out on the bottom and then pull the 2 bolts out on top on each side. That way we can remove the entire bumper beam and do the work off the car. That way we're not so close to all these lines and everything else. We'll take a 15mm socket. Having a short extension may help, especially for the top ones, but we're going to pull all of these bolts out. At the very corner on each side, we're going to have these speed nuts, or those retaining nuts on there again. You just grab a pair of pliers, kind of get behind it until you can get it to come off that stud. And once you have all the bolts removed, we grab our bumper beam, we can pull out, and again, we can grab a grinder, and we're going to be flattening out this lower section here. And whenever we go to grind the bumper, the area we need to grind down is that little lip that's right on the bottom section of the mounting holes. And the easiest way is going to be use an angle grinder, but if you can also just cut that lip off so it sits flush. Either way, you do just want to be careful and make sure that you're taking your time. And it is going to be a lot easier doing it off the vehicle rather than trying to worry about not catching anything around it. So we're just going to use this angle grinder, go around the edge here so it's nice and flat. And you can see where I ground out, and it did leave some exposed metal, which is never a good idea to leave exposed metal in your vehicle. So I'm going to come back with some spray paint. I'm just going to cover up all the area that we ground on, hopefully preventing any kind of rust or corrosion from building up. So anytime we have any exposed metal on our vehicle, we're going to go ahead and come back with some spray paint and cover it up. Now that our bumper beam is trimmed, we want to put it back in place. So line up the holes. And then we want to get our top bolts back in place just so we can re-secure the bumper beam. But for now, just want to get at least one in on each side. That way the bumper will hold itself up and we can put the rest of the hardware in. And we can tighten those 2 top bolts up. So now we can grab the main section of our base plate. Each one of the tabs or sides is going to be labeled, but in case the stickers fell off, if you look at it, we're going to have 2 round holes on the bottom with a little oblong hole, and that tapered section should be kind of going towards the center back of the vehicle. These 2 top holes are going to line up with our bumper, lift it into position, and then the studs should pass through the smaller holes. We want to take the factory hardware that we removed earlier and loosely get it in place in that middle hole and the two bottom holes. So again, we just want to get these at least hand tight for now. And the driver's side is going to go in the exact same way. Just going to be labeled for the driver. We'll slide it in and then loosely put the factory bolts back in these three locations as well. So now at the bottom of our base plate, right underneath our bumper beam, we're going to have a hole right where our tow hooks were going in. So we're going to take one of the bolts from our tow hooks, we're going to go through our base plate and thread it into the factory mounting location. Again, we just want to get this loosely in place. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Now for our two final mounting points on each side, it's going to be right underneath the bumper. Should line up with the two bolts that we're holding it in place. I'm going to grab a new 10mm bolt out of our kit. Now you're going to have Loctite in your kit as well. You want to put a bead onto the threads. Then we're going to take a spring washer or a lock washer, slide it over. We're going to take a fender washer, go over our bolt, and then we're going to line it up. We want to get it at least a couple threads in by hand, making sure that it actually threads into the mounting location. And then we're going to repeat it for the other three remaining locations, the one next to here and the two on the other side. And once we get those loosely in, we do want to pull the rest of our bolts out at least one by one and put a little bit of blue Loctite on each one of the bolts so that we can tighten everything up. Now we can come back and we can tighten up all of our bolts. So for those three outer ones, we're using a 15mm socket along with the top two bolts for our bumper beam. That 5/8 or 16mm socket for the bolt on the bottom where we took our tow hooks out. And for the two 10mm bolts that we added new, we're going to be using a 17mm socket. Now you want to make sure you come back with a torque wrench, and we're going to torque all of our hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. You want to make sure you go back and repeat that for any remaining hardware that you have. Our final step is going to be putting in our permanent safety cables. Now we're going to have a quick link. If you look on the end of your base plate, we do have an attachment point. So just make it easy on myself, I'm just going to hang my quick link there. And we're going to have a loop on each end of our safety cable. Now the main goal here is that our safety cable needs to be attached to our base plate and the frame of our vehicle. So I'm going to take my safety cable and I'm going to route it behind my base plate. And then we can start pushing it up towards the frame. So we can get a hold of it, bring it over the top. The only thing you do want to be mindful of when you are routing your safety cables is you want to watch all these wires, lines, hoses, or anything else, because we don't want it to rub against it, cause any issues, but we can't always tie up the slack with some zip ties once we have it routed. It may be easier if we take our cable and go over the top and have it come back down. But again, you just kind of want to watch the lines and hoses and route your cable to where it's not going to interfere with anything. There is quite a bit of hose and lines inside the engine bay right here, so you do want to be careful. But once you get it wrapped around the frame, we can attach both of the cables to the end of the quick link here. And then it's just a matter of closing it up. I'm going to come back with a wrench, make sure that's nice and secure and it's not going to work itself loose. And then to keep everything kind of nice and neat, I'm actually just going to take a couple zip ties and bring it in right above the base plate, so it kind of pulls these two cables together, takes up all the slack right in here behind the bumper, so it won't interfere with anything, and we don't have to worry about the quick link or the safety cables bouncing around behind the fascia, because we'll pull up all the slack right here. Now that we have this one in place, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Again, you just want to be mindful of how you route your cables, because we don't want to cause any kind of interference or rubbing issues against any of the other components. Once you have all your bolts torqued down and both safety cables are in place, you can go ahead and reinstall your fascia in the reverse order. The nice thing about the base plate is it's not going to require any kind of trimming, because our base plate's going to come right out where those toe hooks were, so we don't have to cut anything. However, I do suggest if you're putting more components on, like wiring or a braking system, definitely go ahead and do that now before you put the fascia back on, because it's going to be a lot easier to route everything and not have to deal with all the plastic. So that's what we're going to do. Now that we have all of our other components on, we're going to get ready to put our fascia back in place. However, we have a few components that are going to be coming through the grill, so I'm going to hold my fascia up as close as I can to where it's supposed to line up. And then I'm going to take a marker and mark out the area that needs to be trimmed so that we can get our fascia back in place. We'll just make a few marks of the area that we're going to have to trim out. Just go across the top here. And then we'll mark out our breakaway switch as well. And then we can pull the fascia off, trim off the plastic, and then put it on all the way and just start replacing the fasteners. I'm just using a pair of tin snips and kind of just cutting the sections that attach the honeycomb together. And we can always come back, clean off the paint, and if we want, we can come back with a rotary tool, a file, sandpaper, whatever you got, and we can clean up these edges so we have a nice smooth, clean edge to it. Now, whenever you do get your fascia back on, I always suggest putting at least one bolt in, if not one on each side. Right here's a good spot because it'll hold the fascia on the rest of the way until we can get all the clips in place. And then it's just a matter of replacing all the hardware and clipping our fascia back in. Now with the push pins, you want to make sure that the center is still sticking out. You push the base in first, and then press down the center to lock it down. And that's going to be the same for all of these style push pins. Now, if we drilled out those rivets at the very bottom front corner, they are going to give us new rivets to replace them. Now, they're metal rivets, so we are going to need a rivet gun to put these in. But you want to get the rivet to go through both pieces of plastic. So it's going all the way through, and we can take our rivet gun and we can get the rivets set into that panel. Now typically, if you have a hand rivet gun, it'll most likely break off that tab, but ours is set nice in there, so without risk breaking it, I'm just going to take a pair of cutters and cut off this excess stem here. But once you have all your fasteners back in, that'll finish up your installation and your look at. the Demco tabless base plate kit on our 2020 Jeep Cherokee.